Hey, Oxford Church of Christ. This is going to be, I guess, Life with Ben rather than Life with Les. Les is speaking either virtually or in person. I'm not going to lie. I'm not completely sure. At the Starkville Church of Christ tonight. And so I'm filling in. And so you are stuck with Life with Ben. And I want to actually kind of let you into what the RFC was talking about last spring. And our theme last year for the academic year was faithfulness amidst brokenness. And so we looked at different facets of how God is restoring different kind of facets of our life. Right, how God's faithfulness, the brokenness against amidst all these facets. So we looked at how God was restoring our relationship with Himself, how God was restoring our relationship with our own self, right, our identity, how God is restoring our relationship with His creation in the physical kind of world, and then also how God is restoring our relationship with other humans, right? Because we're experiencing a lot of brokenness with our relationship with other humans. So we looked at different types of relationships. Whether that be friendship or marriage or obviously for college kids dating or singleness. But before we were able to really, I think, jump into those, we had to, I think, look at two foundations or pillars of friendship, of these relationships. And the first is friendship. And the second, though, and this is what tonight's lesson is going to be about, was conflict, right? If we live in a fallen world, we have to admit that part of friendship, part of relationship with other humans is how to handle conflict well. And so I want to play this connect from last spring semester. And part of what has kind of given me this idea to play this one is that Les has been teaching on Sunday mornings through the book of James, and his focus has been spiritual maturity. If we want to become a church, a body, a people who are spiritually mature, then I think the first thing that we're going to have to learn how to do is how to approach conflict Christianly, right? I think our tendency, and you're going to see me kind of set this up in the lesson, but their tendency is to avoid conflict at all costs. People who you may think someone's actually quite combative, but usually what you see with combative people is they're avoiding conflict through dominance or sheer force of will, and they almost just kind of quell or smush the conflict by being so confrontational that the other person can't respond. On the other hand, we have the more kind of common way of thinking about avoiding conflict, and that is avoidance through evasion, right? You're just kind of always just avoiding it and never engaging in it, never willing to kind of confront or be confronted. So you just avoid it. You evade it at all cost. But as Christians, and we see in the life of Jesus that we're constantly called to engage in healthy or Christian conflict in which we speak truth and love to one another. And I hope that this lesson unpacks some of those ideas for you, because we can't avoid conflict. We live in a fallen world, and so we have to learn how to engage in it well, how to engage in it Christianly. So I'm going to turn it over to the lesson, and I hope it is beneficial to you. I hope it is engaging for you, and I hope it is helps you grow. I know studying for it made me grow in some different ways. So I'm turning it over now.
As you know, our theme has been faithfulness amidst brokenness this year, and we've talked about everything from heaven to, which is God restoring not just some things, but all things, right? Every facet and every type of relationship that we have. And so we've looked at different types of relationships that God is restoring throughout this year, and we looked at how God is restoring our relationship with Himself, how God is restoring our relationship with the creation as we looked at work, and then we've looked at how God has restored our relationship, yes, even with our own self, our identity. And now we're beginning just the kind of final series this semester, and that is how God is restoring our relationship with others. And I don't think there's a better way to start off this conversation of how God is restoring a relationship with others than to talk about conflict and the idea of conflict. And as we just kind of begin this conversation tonight about conflict, I just want to start off by saying I don't think there's a greater witness to campus and our community than if we recaptured a sense of healthy conflict in our Christian community. You see, no one likes conflict. I think we have this misconception that there are people who avoid conflict and there are people that rush into conflict. But actually, both of those reactions are people avoiding conflict, right? So if you think about it, the more common conception of someone who dislikes conflict is someone who avoids it, right? And I have sometimes I kind of exhibit this trait, but it's this idea that conflict is something you just run away from, or you hide from, or you just kind of people please so that you don't have to enter into conflict. But the other side of that, the kind of other side of it, something that we may I think misinterpret as someone liking conflict, but it actually isn't. They're actually avoiding conflict, is when someone goes into conflict and they attack conflict. Right? Someone who's almost, they're ready to debate. But what they're doing is they're being so dominant. They're being so dominant that they're actually not even having conflict. They're smushing the conflict. Someone who kind of rushes into, or how we would perceive to maybe rush into conflict, is actually someone who's trying to beat the conflict. You see, if they dominate it, then they don't actually have to enter into conflict. True, healthy conflict where they could be exposed as wrong, or the person they're dialoguing with could be exposed as wrong. What they're doing is they're just going to jump into conflict and they win the battle. You see, that's actually avoidance of conflict too. And so whether and sometimes I exhibit that trait. I hate conflict. Sometimes I'm avoiding it. Sometimes I'm running away from it. Sometimes I'm hiding away from it. Sometimes I'm people pleasing my way out of it. And sometimes I'm gonna rush in and I'm just gonna dominate the conflict so that it doesn't happen. I'm just gonna basically smush it. Like you kind of put out a fire with a blanket. And you just take all the oxygen out of it, and you just kind of avoid conflict in that way. You see, but real healthy conflict is something that is more like a dialogue. Two people coming together, or two entities coming together and having a discussion that leads to growth. And so in this fallen world in which we live, this world of brokenness in which God is being faithful, healthy conflict, I think, is intrinsic to healthy relationships and intrinsic to having a healthy Christian community, a vibrant Christian community. So the question is not whether or not there will be conflict in a Christian community, right? We live in a world that's fallen. We live in a world that is marked by sin and its curse. There's going to be conflict. We aren't always going to agree. We aren't always going to have the same worldview. So the question is not whether or not there will be conflict, but the question is, how are we going to handle it? Are we going to avoid conflict by running away from it or smushing it? Or are we going to humbly enter into it as an opportunity to grow, both as an individual and deeper as a community? And so tonight, before we look at the different types of relationships in which we find ourselves, whether that be dating relationships or friendships or singleness or marriage, I want to look at two of the most direct passages on interpersonal conflict in Scripture. It's found in Matthew 5 and in Matthew 18. Matthew 5, 21 through 24 reads this, and this is Jesus' words from the Sermon on the Mount. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them. Then come and offer your gift. There's some really big things that we're going to unpack there in a minute, but first let me read Matthew 18, 15 through 22, and I think this is such a powerful verse. So let's begin in verse 15. If your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. Notice what it doesn't say there. It doesn't say gossip. It doesn't say go and tell others about what they've done. Doesn't go and say, air your grievances with this person to the world. But it says, go and point out their fault. Not go in an argument with them, not go make them feel terrible, but go and point out their fault, just between the two of you. And if they listen, you have won them over. But if they will not listen, take one or two along, not gossip to these two, but in an other-oriented way, go to them, so that every matter may be established by the testimony or 2 or 3 witnesses. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen to even the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. Truly I tell you, whatever is bound on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, I truly tell you that if two of you on earth agree about anything they ask for, it'll be done by them by my Father in heaven. For where there 2 or 3 gather in my name, there I am with them. Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times? Jesus answered, I tell you, not 7 times, but 70 times 7 times. So what I want to do is I just kind of want to take these 2 passages. I want to just kind of address some of the assumptions that Jesus is making in these passages. Okay, the first, and I think this one's pretty just kind of clear off the bat, and that is that conflict is a spiritual matter. It's a spiritual task. If you look at Matthew 5, it's before you worship, you're supposed to go reconcile with your brother or sister whom you perceive them having something against you, right? So even before you go worship, before you offer up something on the altar, go first be reconciled. And so what we see here is that our vertical relationship with God has horizontal implications on our life, right? And when we see this yet again, just this idea that conflict is a spiritual matter in Matthew 18, again, truly I tell you, if 2 of you on earth agree about anything they ask for, it'll be done for them by their Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 gather in my name, right? And this is kind of in the context of conflict, right? This is said in the context of conflict. It's a famous verse, but have we realized it's said in the context of conflict? If 2 or 3 of you gather in my name, there I am with them. That's powerful, right? God is at work in this conflict. So conflict is a spiritual task. That's the first one. The second thing that I want to bring out is that both the perceived right and the perceived wronged are responsible to reconcile, right? So in Matthew 5, it's if you think someone thinks you have wronged them, then you go to them and reconcile with them, right? So that's if you think that someone thinks you have wronged them. That's like if you're the wrongdoer or the perceived wrongdoer, you're responsible to go reconcile. And then in Matthew 18, it's if you think someone has sinned, you are burdened to confront them. So it's both the wrong and the wronged and the wrongdoer are responsible for reconciliation. And so it's kind of like, well, that's their problem, or that's their problem because they're the one who wronged me, or that's their problem because they think I've done something against them, but I really haven't. And no. We're all responsible for healthy conflict in a Christian community, right? This is what these verses are telling us. We're all responsible for this healthy conflict in a Christian community. Now, the third thing that I think is just kind of assumed by Jesus in this is that it's only those in the conflict that are supposed to be involved. Now, notice we kind of walk through this, but notice what Matthew 5 doesn't say. It doesn't say that they stopped by and told people along the way as they were going to reconcile with this person. No, they went directly to the person. It isn't that they went and trashed them to other people. It's not that they went and gossiped to them about the person that thinks they've done something wrong to them to other people. No. They went directly to the person. Yet again, in Matthew 18, only bringing you only bring someone else in after a one-on-one conversation. And even though you're bringing someone else in, it's a very other-oriented thing that you're doing by bringing someone else in. It's not gossip. It's not trash talking. It's not defaming. It's not passive aggression. No. It's other-oriented. It's not to win the argument. It's to bring them into reconciliation, right? So one thing I just want to point out here is that we can do the right action, right? We can bring somebody else into the conflict. But if we do it for the wrong reason, if we do it to win the argument, if we do it to kind of shame the other person rather than to bring them to reconciliation, right? If we have the wrong motivation in this, even if we're doing the right action, we're still in the wrong. We're still in the wrong. How many times have you entered into conflict to win? How many times have you entered into conflict to make someone else feel bad about themselves? How many times have you gone to somebody else for advice about someone whom you're worried about, but you've not done so for the other person's good? I think we've all done that at different points in our life. I know I've done that, and I regret it when I have, and I'm ashamed of it when I have. So it's not just doing the right action; it's the right motivation, right? Conflict is supposed to be other oriented. We're supposed to be concerned with the reconciliation with the other person and the growth of ourselves and the other person, right? Not winning some argument, not making them look bad so that we look good, not just winning over kind of the crowd so that to create teams. That's just divisive, right? By the way, nothing in here, right? And that's kind of the main point of this. In Matthew 5 and in Matthew 18, never do you see Jesus ever talking about creating teams. Well, this person's wronged me in this way, or this person thinks I've wronged them, but they're wrong, and so you know what? I'm just gonna go bad talk them, or I'm gonna go, make sure everyone realizes that I haven't done anything wrong. That's not what's happening here. This idea of creating teams or creating divisiveness or creating cliques based off of different worldviews or different just different interactions or or even just a real wrong. It's always reconciliation inside of the community so the community can be one. That's always the goal. So motivation matters. It's not just doing the right actions. It's not just going through the right steps. It's what's our motivation behind this conflict that's going to make it healthy or not. The fourth thing that I want to point out is that, and this one I think is really the main point, and that is that peace is not the absence of conflict. Hear this. Peace is not the absence of conflict, but peace is rather the presence of healthy conflict inside of a community. Peace can only happen when healthy conflict is taking place. You see, because we're all broken, we're all sinful, we all have messed up, we've all wronged each other in some form or fashion. And so peace can only come about as we enter into healthy conflict with one another. I mean, if you look back at Matthew 5 and the kind of beginning verse of this little section on anger and bitterness, starting in verse 21, just let me read it for you. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court, and anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Right? What Jesus is talking about there is bitterness. You see, bitterness is what's going to reign instead of peace if we're not entering into conflict. I mean, think about this. I mean, I think we've all had this experience. When we feel like someone's wronged us, or we feel like someone thinks we've wronged them, instead of going to them and trying to reconcile with them, trying to understand what actually happened, trying to understand their point of view, trying to really genuinely become one with them again, we've just avoided it. And we've allowed bitterness to fester in our hearts. And we made it very black and white. They're wrong, we're right. And we want to have others, kind of join our team in this. But Jesus is telling us here that is wrong, and yes, even sinful. Jesus is telling us here that peace can only come, that oneness can only come, that unity can only come in a community that is practicing the habit of healthy conflict. And healthy conflict is other-oriented. Healthy conflict does not involve gossip. Healthy conflict always starts with a one-on-one interaction. And healthy conflict has the motivation of reconciliation and growth, right? And so here's the kind of fourth point, and it's kind of the point I just made. Sorry, the fifth point, and it's kind of the point I just made, and that is that conflict leads to growth and reconciliation. It's kind of been the theme throughout all of this, right? It's not about winning or gaining ammo to win a battle, nor is it about our own safety or security or status. Here, that's conflict is not about gaining our own safety, security, or status. But the end goal of healthy conflict, the end goal of Christian conflict is peace. And anything outside of that goal, anything outside of pursuing that oneness, pursuing that unity, which is not necessarily uniformity, is less than Christian. Anything that's in goal in terms of conflict, that is not peace or unity or oneness, is outside of, or is less than Christian, right? And so just as we kind of close some of these, as I close some of these thoughts out, I just want to kind of ask two questions. Why is this so difficult for us? And secondly, why does it matter? I think it's difficult because confronting leaves us exposed to being confronted, right? I mean, think about this in kind of two ways. The first way is that, a community that confronts means that you will be confronted, right? If we had a community that was really practicing healthy conflict, in which we were kind of always kind of entering into one-on-one conversations about, hey, what did you really mean by this? And hey, I felt this is the way I was made to feel when this happened. Am I right or wrong, right? If you're going to confront somebody else in a community, what you're opening yourself up to is being confronted, right? If you are going to be a confronter, you have to be willing to be confronted. And so it's hard that way. It's scary. It's difficult because of that. And then the second kind of way I want you to think about this is, just even on the interpersonal interaction, even when you're being the one who's confronting somebody else. Just that act. I mean, if you think about it, when you confront somebody else, you're also kind of leaving yourself exposed in that moment, right? Because if you're healthily confronting another person, it requires you to examine yourself. And that's dangerous, right? Because you could find out as you're confronting another person that you were the person actually in the wrong, or maybe that you all were both wrong, or maybe that you were holding this bitterness against this person and you shouldn't have been. That was just a misunderstanding. And so I think this idea of conflict is so difficult because it leaves us open to having to change. It leaves us open to having to have our mind altered. It leaves us open to growing, and sometimes growing is difficult. Actually, it's never easy. And then finally, why does this matter? Well, it matters because passive aggression and gossip and just divisiveness, those are the things that kill Christian witness in a Christian community. Think about it this way, what kind of community do you want to invite somebody into? If you're talking to a non-Christian, what kind of community, and you want to invite them to church with you, you want to invite them to the RFC, you have to ask yourself first the question, what kind of community am I inviting them into? One of the most powerful conversations I ever had was with a student who said, I want to invite people to church with me, but the people here are just too mean. Think about that. See, if we're not having healthy conflict, that's leading us to peace, because there's no such thing as peace in a community without healthy conflict. Then when we invite people into our Christian community, are we inviting them into a community that is defined by anger and rage and malice? Or are we inviting them into a community that is defined by the reign of peace that comes through Christ? This matters. If we want to be a community that reaches this campus, if we want to be a community that has an impact on our community around us, then we have to be a community that can pursue peace through healthy conflict. And we cannot be a community that is defined by gossip and slander and divisiveness and cliques and dividing up into teams. And that's going to involve individuals making the hard choice of having one-on-one conversations to try to better understand where the other person's coming from, entering into healthy conflict, healthy dialogue. And then finally, the kind of second reason why I think this matters is we want to be a community that is all about growing in Christ. We want to be a community that is defined as people who are growing because the person and work of Christ is present in them, that the Holy Spirit is at work in them. But if we're not willing to have healthy conflict, if we're not allowing ourselves to be confronted and if we ourselves are not willing to confront others in a healthy way, then ask yourself the question, how are we going to grow? It's not just going to happen. Growth doesn't happen in a silo, right? It happens as human life interacts with human life. It happens when two of us gather to try to better understand one another and understand where each other's coming from. And then the Holy Spirit meets us in that conversation. That's what Matthew 18 is all about. isn't it? This matters. Healthy conflict matters. And so as we kind of move forward and we talk about all these different relationships, that you're going to have, your friendships, your dating relationships, all the different kind of relationships you have in life. If you are not practicing healthy Christian Jesus-defined conflict inside of your community, your Christian community, inside of the RFC, inside of these interpersonal relationships that you have, then all of them are going to fail.